Liberal arrogant reporter attacks Keanu Reeves. His response leaves him humiliated. Keanu Reeves sat at the center of a crowded press conference, surrounded by flashing cameras and a sea of reporters eager to ask their questions. The air was filled with excitement and anticipation, as Keanu had just finished discussing his latest movie, which had everyone buzzing. His reputation as a kind and humble person had always preceded him, and this time was no different. Even though he was one of the most famous actors in Hollywood, Keanu had always remained down-to-earth and approachable, a rare trait in such a high-profile industry. The conference room was full of faces, some familiar to Keanu, others new. Everyone wanted a chance to get a piece of him, whether it was for a quick interview or a few sound bites for their news outlets. Reporters were scribbling notes, cameramen were adjusting their equipment, and assistants were running around, making sure everything went smoothly. It felt like a normal press day in Hollywood, yet something was about to change. At the front of the room sat a reporter known for his boldness and sharp views. He was a liberal journalist, not afraid to stir the pot and tackle controversial subjects. He had a reputation for pushing boundaries, often bringing up issues that made others uncomfortable. He wasn't known for respecting boundaries, especially when it came to celebrities. His goal wasn't just to report the news. It was to challenge, provoke, and leave a lasting impact. When Keanu was asked a few simple questions by other reporters, he answered them with his usual grace, smiling kindly as he responded. His calm demeanor made him seem almost unshakable. But when the liberal reporter got his turn, things took a different turn. "Keanu," the reporter started, his voice deliberately cutting through the calm atmosphere. "What do you think about the current political landscape? A lot of celebrities are using their platforms to push for change. Are you planning to take a stand on these issues as well?" Keanu paused for a moment, glancing at the reporter. It was clear that the question was intended to push him into a corner, to get him to either take a side or make a controversial statement. The reporter's tone was challenging, almost as if he were daring Keanu to speak out in a way that would give the media something to chew on. But Keanu, as always, remained calm. He simply smiled and looked at the room as if collecting his thoughts before responding. His voice was soft, but it carried with an undeniable strength. "I believe in being true to oneself," Keanu said, his words steady and unhurried. "I think everyone has the right to speak their truth, and I choose to focus on what matters to me: kindness, respect, and understanding. I believe actions speak louder than words, and I prefer to show my values through my work and how I treat others." The reporter, not satisfied with the answer, pressed further. He was clearly trying to get Keanu to express an opinion that could be used against him in the media. "But Keanu, people look up to you, they follow you, they expect you to take a stand on important issues. Don't you think it's time you spoke out about the injustices happening in the world?" Keanu's eyes softened, but he didn't flinch. He took a deep breath, his calm demeanor never wavering. "I understand why people want to hear their heroes speak up. But sometimes, silence can be just as powerful as words. I choose to contribute in my own way." The room seemed to hold its breath as Keanu's response hung in the air. His words weren't a direct rebuttal, but they were a quiet challenge to the reporter's expectations. The audience, made up of fellow journalists, seemed to sense the tension building. Some of them nodded, perhaps admiring Keanu for standing his ground without getting drawn into the debate. Others watched eagerly, anticipating what would happen next. But the reporter wasn't done yet. He was determined to push further. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he shot another question at Keanu. "So you're telling us that you won't speak up about the issues that matter, even though your voice could inspire change?" Keanu paused as if he were considering the question carefully. "It's not that I don't care about the world around me," he said quietly. "I care deeply, but my way of contributing is through being present, being kind, and being authentic. I don't need to shout to be heard." There was a moment of silence. Keanu's response was simple yet profound, and it felt like the room was collectively exhaling. The reporter seemed taken aback, his expression faltering slightly. But instead of backing down, he tried to twist the conversation into a more personal direction. "What about your own beliefs, Keanu?" the reporter asked. "Do you have the courage to stand for something, or are you just hiding behind your fame? You could do more if you just took a stand, you know." Keanu's face didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his lips, almost as if he were amused by the persistence of the reporter. He didn't raise his voice or get defensive. He simply replied, "I've spent my life choosing peace over conflict, and I'm okay with that." The reporter, clearly frustrated by Keanu's refusal to engage in the battle he was trying to start, finally sat back in his seat. His face was flushed, his eyes darting around the room, sensing that the audience was no longer on his side. The tension had shifted. Keanu had deftly avoided the trap laid out for him, turning each jab into an opportunity to reaffirm his personal values. The other reporters in the room began to murmur, their interest piqued by the way Keanu had handled the situation. Some admired his restraint, others wondered what might have happened if Keanu had engaged more directly. But everyone could agree on one thing: Keanu had left a lasting impression. His calmness in the face of provocation had won the room over. The reporter, however, was not done yet. He wasn't going to let Keanu off that easily. As the questions continued, he pushed even harder, trying to provoke Keanu into a more personal, emotional response. He had hoped to get a soundbite that would make headlines, something that would paint Keanu as out of touch or unwilling to address the serious issues of the day. But Keanu, as he always did, responded with kindness and wisdom, refusing to rise to the bait. Every word he spoke seemed carefully considered, as if he had learned over the years how to handle such situations with grace. And with each passing moment, the reporter's arrogance seemed to evaporate. By the end of the press conference, it was clear that Keanu had won this battle, not through any dramatic confrontation or cutting remarks, but through his quiet, steady confidence. He had diffused the situation with ease, leaving the reporter to fume silently in his corner. Keanu's response had been a lesson in humility, patience, and authenticity. As he left the room, the reporters buzzed with excitement, some trying to analyze what had just happened, others just in awe of the way Keanu had handled himself. In the coming days, the story of the press conference would make headlines. But the headlines wouldn't focus on the reporter's aggressive questioning, they would focus on Keanu's dignity. The world would see him not just as a talented actor, but as a person who had shown that true strength comes from staying true to oneself, no matter the pressure. The reporter, meanwhile, would find himself facing a different kind of challenge. The challenge of coming to terms with the fact that Keanu had turned his aggressive questions into a moment of quiet victory, leaving the reporter humiliated by his own failed attempts to provoke a reaction. The atmosphere in the room had shifted after Keanu's calm yet firm response. As the press conference continued, the liberal reporter sat there, his mind racing. He had been outmaneuvered in a way he hadn't expected, and now his frustration was building. He couldn't let this go. Keanu had embarrassed him without even trying, and the reporter couldn't stand the idea of losing the opportunity to get a story that would grab attention. The next few questions came from other reporters, but the reporter who had earlier clashed with Keanu didn't listen to any of them. He was waiting for the right moment to strike again. Keanu, as always, remained composed, smiling gently as he answered questions with his usual grace. But the reporter saw an opening and decided that this time he was going to go for it. This time, he wouldn't let Keanu slip away. With a sharp breath, the reporter finally spoke up again, his voice louder this time, more demanding. "Keanu, you say you don't need to speak up on the issues, but isn't that a bit irresponsible? So many people look up to you, and here you are, choosing not to use your voice for the greater good. Don't you think it's time you took a stand, not just for your fans, but for the world?" Keanu turned his gaze toward the reporter, his expression still calm but now more focused. He didn't immediately answer, as though considering whether to engage in this second round of questioning. The room fell silent. Every reporter present had heard the challenge in the reporter's voice, and many of them waited with bated breath to see how Keanu would respond. They all knew Keanu as someone who avoided drama, someone who didn't look for conflict. But this time the situation felt different. Would he rise to the occasion? With the smallest of smiles, Keanu finally responded, his voice steady and clear. "I understand that many people expect celebrities to take sides, to speak out on every issue. But sometimes, the best thing I can do is lead by example, to show people that kindness and respect are the values worth holding on to." The reporter's eyes narrowed. He had been hoping for a more heated exchange, something he could twist and turn into a headline. Keanu's response, however, was calm, almost soothing. It wasn't what the reporter had expected, and it was certainly not the kind of response that would lead to controversy. Still, the reporter wasn't ready to back down. "But Keanu," he said, leaning forward with his notebook ready to record every word, "you're in a position of power. You can influence people, change their way of thinking. Why not use that power to stand up for causes that matter?" The question was asked with more intensity this time, almost as if the reporter was accusing Keanu of being weak for not speaking out. He had heard about Keanu's reputation for avoiding politics and hot topics, and he saw it as a weakness. To the reporter, celebrities were supposed to be bold, to lead the charge. Keanu's refusal to get involved felt like a betrayal to the reporter's way of thinking. Keanu, unfazed, replied slowly, "I don't believe power is just about making noise. It's about making a difference in the quiet moments, in the little acts of kindness we show one another. I don't need to shout to make an impact." The response, though simple, carried a weight that left the room silent for a moment. The reporter opened his mouth to speak again, but this time he hesitated. There was a small but undeniable shift in the mood. His aggressive approach was beginning to feel more out of place, more like a child throwing a tantrum in a room full of adults. Keanu had turned the tables once again. This wasn't a battle of politics or ideologies. It was a battle of values, and Keanu's were grounded in kindness, humility, and authenticity. The reporter had come in expecting to make a statement, expecting to get a fiery response, but instead, he found himself faced with someone who refused to engage in the conflict. The rest of the reporters were beginning to notice the contrast. Some of them were starting to shift their attention away from the reporter and onto Keanu. They were fascinated by how Keanu handled himself with such quiet strength. The more the reporter pushed, the more Keanu seemed to remain unaffected. It wasn't that Keanu didn't care. It was that he had a deeper understanding of the way things worked, a kind of wisdom that the reporter couldn't quite grasp. At that moment, another reporter asked a neutral question, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But the reporter, still determined to make a point, couldn't let go. He wasn't finished with Keanu yet. He had to win this one. "Keanu," the reporter began, his voice strained, "you're telling us that silence is your way of making an impact, but how do you justify it when people are suffering, when there are issues at the heart of our society that need to be addressed? How do you stand by and do nothing when your platform could change the world?" Keanu looked at him directly, his eyes never leaving the reporter's face. "I don't believe that standing by means doing nothing. It means taking the time to listen, to understand. When I'm in a position to help, I do, but I don't believe that the loudest voice is always the one that makes the most difference." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The reporter had no response. There was nothing more he could say to attack Keanu's stance. Every attempt he made to get a rise out of the actor had failed, and it was clear that he wasn't going to get the confrontation he had hoped for. The reporters in the room were beginning to sense that the exchange had shifted. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about character. Keanu had handled the reporter's increasingly aggressive questions with grace, never once losing his composure. He had refused to be dragged into the petty battle the reporter had wanted to create. Instead, he had risen above it, showing that true strength wasn't about fighting or proving a point. It was about staying true to yourself, even in the face of criticism. The tension in the room was palpable. Some of the reporters were now starting to feel embarrassed for the liberal reporter, who had pushed too hard and too far. His attempts to provoke Keanu had only made him look unprofessional. The respect that Keanu had earned over the years had only grown in that moment. The room was on his side now, and the reporter knew it. The questions continued, but now there was a noticeable shift in the way the press conference was unfolding. People were asking questions that were more focused on Keanu's career and his personal philosophies, rather than trying to provoke him into saying something controversial. Keanu answered them all with the same kindness and authenticity, his words simple but thoughtful. It was clear that his ability to handle tough situations with grace was something many respected. As the conference began to wind down, the reporter who had been trying to stir up trouble sat quietly in his seat, scribbling notes, but no longer looking eager to ask any more questions. His earlier bravado had evaporated, leaving him to wonder how he had miscalculated so badly. He had expected to get a dramatic soundbite, something that would put him in the spotlight. Instead, he had been shown up by someone who refused to engage in the fight. Keanu, on the other hand, left the room the same way he had entered, humble, calm, and composed. The press conference was over, but the story wasn't quite finished. It would continue to be told in the days that followed, but the reporter's words would fade into the background. Keanu's message would be the one remembered, the message that sometimes the most powerful response is the one that doesn't involve a fight at all. The press conference had taken a dramatic turn. Keanu Reeves had gracefully handled the intense questioning from the reporter who had hoped to stir up controversy. As the session continued, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. What had started as an attempt to provoke, Keanu had instead turned into a demonstration of his incredible composure and strength of character. The rest of the reporters, who had initially been intrigued by the confrontation, now began to see something deeper in Keanu, something they hadn't fully appreciated before. Keanu, as always, remained unfazed. His humility shone through, and his words carried the same level of sincerity and authenticity that had made him beloved by fans for years. The room was still, each reporter processing what had just unfolded. They had expected a celebrity meltdown, a heated exchange, or perhaps some dramatic outburst. But instead, they had witnessed a moment of quiet strength, and it left them reflecting on their own expectations of the star. The liberal reporter, however, wasn't ready to back down. His frustration had reached its peak. He couldn't accept that Keanu had turned the tables on him so easily. The reporter had come in expecting to make headlines by baiting the actor, but instead, Keanu had quietly exposed the reporter's motives and refused to play along. For someone used to controlling the narrative, this was a challenge that went against his instincts. As the press conference proceeded, the reporter tried to reassert himself, hoping to regain control of the conversation. He cleared his throat and leaned forward once again. "Keanu, you talk about kindness and humility," he said, his voice now tinged with a hint of defensiveness. "But don't you think there's a certain amount of responsibility that comes with being in the spotlight? People look to you for guidance. Isn't it important for someone with your platform to use their influence to speak on issues that matter?" Keanu looked at him again, his expression calm, but this time, his eyes held a deeper understanding. He could tell that the reporter's tone had shifted from curiosity to frustration. It was clear the reporter was struggling to comprehend Keanu's position. Still, Keanu didn't flinch. He knew what the reporter was trying to do. He wasn't trying to change anyone's mind. He was simply holding firm to his own beliefs. "Everyone has their own way of contributing to the world," Keanu replied, his voice steady but full of conviction. "Some choose to speak out loudly, and that's their right. Others, like myself, choose to act in quieter ways. My way is about showing people respect, treating others with kindness, and using my work to connect with people on a deeper level." The reporter opened his mouth to respond, but this time the words didn't come easily. Keanu had just put into words what he had been trying to explain all along, that making a difference didn't require a loud voice or flashy statements. Keanu wasn't trying to silence the reporter, but he was offering a different perspective. And it was a perspective that left the reporter momentarily speechless. There was a pause in the conversation. The other reporters in the room, who had been watching the exchange unfold, began to glance at one another. Some of them had been skeptical of Keanu's reputation as the nice guy of Hollywood. They had expected him to crumble under the pressure of the reporter's pointed questions. But now, they were witnessing something far more impressive than they had anticipated. Keanu had no need to defend his actions. He wasn't playing a game of public relations or trying to protect his image. What he had said in response to the reporter's questions was simple but profound. It was clear that Keanu's actions in his career and personal life spoke for themselves. His commitment to kindness and humility had always been a central part of who he was, and his ability to remain true to that in the face of an attack was nothing short of admirable. For a brief moment, the reporter sat back in his chair, the reality of the situation sinking in. Keanu had outsmarted him, not by retaliating or playing the game of media manipulation, but by staying true to his values. The reporter's frustration deepened. He had tried to challenge Keanu on his platform, tried to box him into a corner where he would have no choice but to choose a side, but Keanu had sidestepped the trap entirely. The tension in the room was palpable. Some of the reporters, sensing the shift in power, quietly began to record their notes, their focus now fully on Keanu. There was a collective realization that Keanu was not just a talented actor. He was a man with principles who wasn't afraid to stand by them, even in the face of provocation. His poise and unwavering character had won the room over, and the reporter who had tried to provoke him now appeared out of touch with what the audience respected. The press conference continued, but it was clear that the dynamic had changed. Keanu no longer needed to justify his position or engage in further debate. His answers had already spoken volumes. The questions that followed were more respectful, more focused on his work and his philosophy. The shift in tone was subtle but unmistakable. The room had gone from a potential battleground to a space where Keanu's quiet strength was being recognized. As the press conference drew to a close, Keanu stood up, ready to leave. The reporters gathered their things, exchanging quick glances with one another, still processing the events that had just transpired. Some were eager to write their stories, but no one seemed to have the same sharp edge they had started with. Keanu's influence had calmed the storm, and the reporter who had tried to pick a fight now found himself sidelined. Keanu didn't rush out of the room. Instead, he took his time, offering a polite nod to the reporters as he made his way toward the exit. There was no sign of arrogance or superiority in his movements, just the same quiet confidence he had displayed throughout the entire exchange. It was a reminder that strength didn't always need to be loud. Sometimes, it was in the stillness that true power was revealed. The reporter who had challenged him sat there, his face flushed, his mind racing. He had failed to provoke the response he had hoped for, and now he had to deal with the consequences. The rest of the reporters, who had once viewed him as a voice of reason in the room, now saw him in a different light. His relentless pursuit of confrontation had backfired, and it was clear that his attempts to undermine Keanu had not only failed but had made him appear petty. In the days that followed, the press coverage of the conference took on a life of its own. The headline wasn't about the reporter's confrontation. It was about how Keanu had handled the situation with grace and dignity. Media outlets across the country reported on the story, but the narrative had shifted. Keanu wasn't just an actor. He was a man of principle, a person who had shown that you didn't need to engage in conflict to prove your worth. The liberal reporter, meanwhile, found himself the subject of ridicule in some circles. His aggressive questioning and attempts to provoke a dramatic reaction from Keanu were seen as a failure, and many in the media began to question his motives. Some called him out for trying to use Keanu's popularity for his own gain, while others criticized him for disrespecting a man who had done nothing but remain true to himself. As for Keanu, he went about his day with the same quiet humility he always had. The incident didn't seem to affect him. He continued to focus on his work and his personal life, staying grounded despite the media attention surrounding the press conference. And while the world continued to talk about the exchange, Keanu simply went on, not needing to make a statement to the world. His actions spoke louder than any words ever could. The dust had settled from the press conference, but the ripples of what had transpired continued to spread throughout the media world. Keanu Reeves had faced an aggressive reporter who had sought to provoke him into a confrontation. But Keanu's calm, thoughtful responses had turned the situation around, leaving the reporter humiliated and speechless. What was meant to be a dramatic moment turned into a quiet demonstration of Keanu's values: humility, kindness, and grace under pressure. In the days that followed, the media buzzed with coverage of the press conference. Articles were written, and social media exploded with reactions from fans, journalists, and critics alike. The story was everywhere. Some outlets focused on the reporter's failed attempts to undermine Keanu, while others highlighted Keanu's quiet victory, his ability to navigate the situation with poise and dignity. It was a story that seemed to resonate with people from all walks of life, reminding them of the importance of staying true to oneself, even when faced with criticism. The reporter, on the other hand, found himself at the center of a media storm of a different kind. The very aggression he had shown toward Keanu in the press conference had backfired, and the public perception of him began to shift. Where once he had been seen as a hard-hitting journalist, now he was viewed by many as someone who had crossed a line. His actions in the conference room became the subject of debate. Had he been too aggressive? Had he used Keanu's celebrity status as a way to make a name for himself? His colleagues, too, began to view him differently. While some understood his desire to provoke a strong reaction for the sake of a good story, many felt that he had taken it too far. Some of the other reporters at the press conference privately expressed their admiration for Keanu, not just because of his celebrity, but because of the way he had handled the situation with such quiet strength. The reporter, however, was left questioning his own motives. Was his desire for a headline more important than the integrity of his work? It wasn't just the journalists who were reflecting on the event. Fans of Keanu, who had long admired his down-to-earth nature, were even more impressed by his response. They praised him on social media, commenting on how he had shown that true strength didn't come from confrontation or drama, but from remaining calm and grounded in the face of adversity. His actions reinforced the idea that sometimes the best response to negativity was simply to rise above it, rather than engage in it. Keanu's reputation grew even stronger in the wake of the press conference. He had been known for his kind demeanor and his reputation as a humble star, but now more people were recognizing that there was something deeper to him than just the image of the nice guy. His ability to deflect the reporters' provocations without raising his voice or getting defensive showed the world that he was someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He was comfortable in his own skin, confident in his beliefs, and secure enough to stay true to himself, no matter the pressure. For Keanu, however, things didn't change much. He continued to go about his work, focusing on his projects and staying connected with his fans. He had never been one for the limelight or for drawing attention to himself, and this situation was no different. Keanu had always preferred to live a simple life, keeping his personal matters private and focusing on the things that mattered most to him: his family, his friends, and his work. While the media continued to cover the story, Keanu quietly moved forward with his day-to-day life, unaffected by the praise or the criticism. In interviews that followed, Keanu was asked about the press conference, but he downplayed the situation. "It wasn't a big deal," he said with a shrug. "It was just a moment, and I think we all move on from it." His modesty, as always, shone through. Keanu wasn't looking for accolades or recognition. He was simply doing what he had always done, living his life according to his values. Meanwhile, the reporter who had instigated the confrontation tried to recover from the fallout. He issued a public statement, claiming that his intent had been to challenge Keanu in a way that would spark an important discussion about the role of celebrities in social issues. But his words seemed hollow, almost as though he were trying to explain away his failure to provoke a response. Many saw the statement as an attempt to salvage his reputation, but the damage had already been done. The public, having witnessed Keanu's dignity, saw through the reporter's explanations. The reporter's career, once marked by bold and provocative journalism, now found itself in a period of uncertainty. Some outlets chose to distance themselves from him, while others questioned whether his approach to reporting was still relevant. His credibility took a hit as the public's perception of him shifted. Journalists began to wonder if this moment would mark a turning point in his career. Would he learn from his mistake, or would he continue down the path of sensationalism? In contrast, Keanu's popularity only grew. His name was no longer just associated with his successful acting career. It was now tied to a larger narrative of integrity and authenticity. The press conference had inadvertently become a defining moment for Keanu. He wasn't just a Hollywood star. He was a man who had shown that true power didn't come from the loudest voice in the room, but from the strength to remain calm and kind in the face of adversity. As the days passed, the story began to fade from the headlines, but the lessons from that day remained with people. Keanu had demonstrated that we didn't need to engage in conflict to be heard. Sometimes, the quietest response was the most powerful one. In a world that often rewarded noise and spectacle, Keanu had proven that silence could be just as effective. He had taken a moment that could have been full of anger and frustration and turned it into an opportunity for reflection, both for himself and for those who had witnessed it. Keanu's influence extended beyond Hollywood. He became a symbol of integrity, and his example was used in discussions about leadership, communication, and the importance of staying true to one's values. People began to reflect on their own actions, asking themselves if they were living in a way that was true to their beliefs. or if they were simply reacting to the noise around them. Keanu's message had transcended the press conference. It had become a reminder that we all have a choice in how we respond to the world, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply to rise above it. For the reporter, life slowly returned to normal, but his reputation was never the same. The moment he tried to create had backfired, and he would always be remembered as the journalist who tried, and failed, to provoke one of Hollywood's most humble stars. In the end, it was Keanu who came out on top, not because of any grand gesture, but because of his unwavering commitment to who he was. The quiet strength he showed in that press conference would stay with him forever, and the world would remember it as one of the defining moments of his career. As the dust settled and the story of the press conference continued to make waves, the impact of that day became more and more apparent. Keanu Reeves, once again, had proven to the world why he was so much more than just a beloved Hollywood star. He was a man of integrity, humility, and quiet strength, a true role model for those who admired him. While the press conference had been a brief moment in time, its aftermath rippled far beyond the walls of that room. For Keanu, though, it was just another day. He returned to his work, his personal life, and his routines, unaffected by the media attention or the praise that had followed. To him, the attention wasn't the point. He had always lived in a way that was true to himself, and he wasn't about to change that now. Keanu's fans, on the other hand, were more vocal than ever. They took to social media, praising his calm demeanor and the way he had handled the situation. Fans from all corners of the world expressed their admiration for how Keanu had handled the confrontation, using his example to inspire others. Many wrote heartfelt messages, sharing how Keanu's actions had reminded them of the power of kindness and the importance of staying true to one's values, even when faced with difficult challenges. "What he did was incredible," one fan wrote on Twitter. "He didn't need to fight back with words or anger. He just showed us how to be better people with kindness. Keanu is truly one of a kind." Others shared similar thoughts, highlighting how Keanu's response was a stark contrast to the typical celebrity reactions that often dominated the headlines. While many famous people seemed to thrive on controversy or conflict, Keanu had remained calm and focused on what truly mattered. His ability to turn a potentially negative situation into a moment of grace only made his fans admire him more. The story continued to spread, reaching people beyond the entertainment industry. The press conference was discussed in classrooms, podcasts, and workplaces. Teachers used the incident as an example of how to handle difficult situations with poise and respect. It became a lesson in how to respond to negativity and how to stand firm in one's beliefs without resorting to anger or retaliation. Even politicians and public figures who had previously been seen as divisive took a moment to reflect on Keanu's example. In an age where public figures were often quick to argue, shout, and name-call, Keanu had shown that there was another way. He had demonstrated that leadership didn't require being the loudest or the most combative. It was about staying true to your values and leading by example. While Keanu had never sought this kind of attention, it became clear that his approach to handling the press conference had made an undeniable impact. He had not only come out of the situation unscathed, but he had also emerged as an example of what it meant to be a true leader in today's world. His name was associated not just with his acting talent, but with his unwavering commitment to kindness, humility, and authenticity. For the reporter who had tried to provoke him, the aftermath was far different. The media world, as expected, quickly turned its gaze toward him. His attempts to stir up controversy had failed spectacularly, and now he had to face the consequences. In the days following the press conference, the story was re-examined from a new angle. Media outlets began to scrutinize his behavior, asking whether he had crossed the line in his questioning and if his tactics had been appropriate. While some defended his right to ask difficult questions, many others criticized him for not showing the respect that Keanu deserved. The conversation quickly shifted from the content of the press conference to the way it had been conducted. Was it fair for the reporter to push Keanu in such an aggressive way? Did his approach reflect the standards of journalism, or had he let his personal bias get in the way of professionalism? The reporter, once known for his brash style and bold questions, now found himself in an uncomfortable position. He had been caught up in the desire for a big story, but in doing so, he had underestimated the power of humility. His own credibility began to waver as people turned their attention to Keanu's graceful handling of the situation. What was once seen as a strong, confident reporter now looked like someone who had failed to understand the importance of respect and professionalism. In private, the reporter reflected on the events of that day. He realized that he had allowed his frustration and desire for a story to cloud his judgment. He had underestimated Keanu's ability to deflect his provocations with ease. What the reporter had seen as a weakness, Keanu's quiet demeanor, had turned out to be his greatest strength. Keanu had shown him that sometimes the best way to handle a challenge wasn't to meet it with force, but with a clear mind and a steady heart. The reporter's career, once filled with promise, now faced a period of uncertainty. Media outlets began to question whether his aggressive style still fit with the changing landscape of journalism. Many felt that the public no longer had the same appetite for sensationalism. Instead, they were drawn to figures like Keanu, who had shown that there was power in kindness, and that strength could come from within, not from loud confrontations. The reporter issued an apology of sorts, claiming that he hadn't intended to attack Keanu personally. He explained that his intention had been to ask tough questions and to spark a conversation about the role of celebrities in social issues. However, his apology felt forced, and many saw it as an attempt to salvage his reputation after the fact. It became clear that no amount of explaining could undo the damage that had already been done. The public had already made up its mind, and the reporter would forever be linked to the press conference in which he failed to provoke Keanu into a fight. Meanwhile, Keanu remained unaffected by the attention. He continued to live his life with the same humility he always had, focusing on his work and spending time with those closest to him. He didn't need the praise or the recognition. His actions spoke for themselves. What mattered to Keanu was living his truth, and the incident at the press conference was just another example of him doing exactly that. In the months that followed, Keanu's influence continued to grow. He became a symbol of what it meant to be a kind and compassionate leader, both in the public eye and behind closed doors. People looked to him as an example of how to stay true to one's values in a world that often seemed filled with noise and conflict. Keanu's message was simple yet powerful. Stay grounded, stay kind, and stay true to who you are. For the reporter, the experience had been a harsh lesson in humility. He had sought to make a name for himself by picking a fight with one of Hollywood's most beloved stars, but in doing so, he had exposed his own weaknesses. Keanu's example had shown him that strength didn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it came from knowing when to step back and let your values speak louder than any argument ever could. As time passed, the story of the press conference became just another chapter in Keanu Reeves' legacy, a legacy built not just on his acting talent, but on his ability to remain humble and kind, no matter the circumstances. Keanu had shown the world that the most powerful responses to conflict were often the quietest. And in doing so, he had earned the respect of millions of people around the world, leaving behind a legacy that would be remembered for generations.